I'm Sam. BadJupiter is my project I've been working on for about 1.5 years, and we're in Tulsa. And we don't have this kind of excellent community up in Tulsa, so I come to Austin to do this. But I came to the Talkabot conference that happened, I think, a little bit over 1 year ago, when I was first getting started, to sort of listen and see kind of what people were doing and how they were doing it and all that. And the most interesting stuff to me, the best presentations, were the ones that kind of talked about how things were being built. So I thought I would kind of come, now that I'm about 1.5 years into this, and I feel like I've figured some things out and made some mistakes, and getting closer to where I want to be. I thought I'd just kind of talk about how I'm doing it, and maybe it'll be interesting or helpful to some of you guys, or maybe you can tell me there's a much easier way, and then I'll quit wasting so much time doing it the way I'm doing it. So I don't have a demo for you, and this is not a product pitch or anything like that, but I have to give you just a tiny bit of context about what BadJupiter is, just so you'll understand kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. He's a personal information assistant. He's a personal assistant that's concerned not with tasks like scheduling meetings or booking flights, but with things like remembering insights and observations, sharing information with other people, and discovering things that you're looking to discover. So the end goal, and one of the things that, you know, candidly I had in mind when I started kind of building BadJupiter, was that I would come to Austin and I would ask BadJupiter where I should get a margarita, and he would give me the 2 best recommendations for me out of all the 1 million recommendations that you could come up with for a place for margarita in Austin, right? For me, it depends on my preferences, what I look for in a place and in a margarita and all that other kind of stuff. The only way he can do that is kind of learn about me, and the way he learns about me is through interactions. So for every BadJupiter user, he kind of starts with a blank sheet of paper. And as they interact with him, he starts to kind of figure out sort of what their preferences and interests and things like that are. So I was trying to figure out what my tech stack was going to be to build this thing. And I was looking at all the different tools and libraries and you know, resources out there for building the conversational interface on front of it, which is kind of it's just a layer, but it's a pretty critical layer for a service like this, because that's the right way to interact with the personal assistant, is by talking to it. And most of what I found 1.5 years ago, and I think it's basically true today, although the state of the art has evolved quite a bit, is that, you know, kind of they start with words and groups of words and pattern matching around words and groups of words, and resolving sort of the best pattern to a response, or to a random one of a set of responses, or something like that. And that's a pretty effective way to do things when what you're trying to do is kind of keep up the pretense of a conversation, right? But it's different when you're trying to actually understand what the user is saying, so that you can kind of learn something about it. So dog, cat, bone, milk, mean, I can use all these different words. Necessarily there's going to be words, or unavoidably there's going to be words that I miss, and that's the challenge with doing something that kind of starts with words, combinations of words and all that. If you think about the way that a little baby human learns language, which is kind of sort of near and dear to my heart, because when I started this 1.5 years ago, my 2 little girls were just getting to be 2 years old, so they were learning English at the same time that I was trying to teach BadJupiter how to learn English. So they start to recognize words first. And the more they hear a word, the kind of the tighter association they'll attach to that word, and they'll start to understand words and groups and context then around words and groups, until at a point, which doesn't take very long for a human brain, they start to understand the context around the word without being dependent on the specific word. So giraffes are mean, even though this little girl's never heard the word giraffe in her life, she'll infer from this, based on what she's learned before, that a giraffe is probably a thing that's probably mean like a cat, because cats are mean, right? So if you have one end of the spectrum, you've got cheap and cheerful and easy frameworks for kind of taking words and group of words and coming up with a response. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got IBM Watson as a good example, right? Which, if you have the right amount of compute resources and the right amount of data to throw at it, you can do pattern matching and statistics. And for certain general applications, that's the best way to go if you have the resources to do it, because that's what a brain does. It starts to understand patterns and pattern matching and all that kind of stuff. The problem that I had with BadJupiter is for every user, I start from scratch with a clean sheet of paper. I have virtually no vocabulary to work with. So all I can really work with is constructs and syntax. So the way I approached kind of building the language parsing interface for BadJupiter was using structural parsers based on parts of speech. So you can find lots of good resources out there for doing parts of speech tagging of words, and you guys probably know all this stuff already. But if you can resolve, if I can trust a third-party utility to basically resolve the words in a user's query to parts of speech, like noun, adjective, adverb, and stuff like that, then I can build grammars that try to make sense of the structure of the query to see if it fits an intent that's something that I can handle. So if you think about BadJupiter, he's got a pretty limited set of skills that he can do. He can remember something for you, he can share something, he can search for something. That's basically it. And there's a finite set of ways that you can ask him to do any of those things. So pretty good chance that if I have cleverly structured chunkers or syntax parsers, without knowing any of the words, I can kind of resolve a query to one of those intents or not. And then if I can resolve it to one of those intents, then I can further resolve it with an intent specific parser to the different components that I need to make sense of it and to act on it. So tell Mike about the mean-eyed cat bar in Austin, right? That structurally resolves pretty quickly to one of the skills that BadJupiter has, which is to share information. I could say, share something with Mike. I could say, tell Mike about something. There's a few different ways I can do that. But at the end of the day, what it needs to figure out is that Mike is a who, and the mean-eyed cat bar is a what, and Austin is a where. And if it's able to do that, then all it needs to do is go and figure out whether Mike is somebody that it's ever heard of, that it knows anything about, or whether it's going to have to further resolve that. If the mean-eyed cat bar means anything at all, and if Austin is a place that it knows. And then it can go out and it can use the resources of the interwebs to kind of do the research that a good personal assistant would do anyway for you, which is kind of figure it out. You shouldn't have to tell it what street the mean-eyed cat bar is on. You shouldn't have to tell it any of that stuff. All that information is out there. The challenge is kind of deriving it to the structure. So that works for the small subset of skills of all the things you'd want an assistant to do that BadJupiter can do. The problem is, what about all the other things you might say to BadJupiter, right? For the longest time, if I couldn't resolve the query to one of the skills that he's able to do, he'd say, I got nothing for you, right? Which is fine. If he can determine that he's not able to handle the query and that he's not going to kind of get there very easily, then he can say, I've got nothing, and maybe you can try it a different way or something. The problem is that one of the things that's engaging about chatbots is the fact that they converse and they communicate. And so a better response would be to respond halfway intelligently. And this is an example of a situation where I don't really have to understand what the user's asking, as long as I can kind of respond in a way that kind of seems like I'm still involved in the conversation. I can try to get them back on track. So when I was thinking about the way to do this, now it's a much bigger problem, right? It's not handling a specific small finite set of skills. It's dealing with anything that anybody could throw at me. So I go back and I look at the frameworks again, because I'm trying to solve a much more general kind of just be a chatbot problem at this point. And I came across not too long ago, a thing called ChatScript. Does anybody know ChatScript? Does anybody work with ChatScript? So ChatScript is cool because, and it's actually flexible and functional enough that it wins contests, because it's kind of it's a rules-driven server for building for building conversations with people, for building chatbots, with the end game being just to have a conversation that seems like a human, right? That would win a Turing contest. So it's overkill in terms of functionality for what I need to do, but a lot of the concepts were relevant and would work well for me, except that the ChatScript server itself, as it exists today, is a server. So although it's an open source thing and you can download it and compile it and have your own, it's a server. It's a pretty opaque thing, right? And what I needed for my purposes, what I thought I needed was some libraries that I could integrate and tweak and muck with and kind of fiddle around with and stuff like that. So instead, what I did was I stole some concepts from ChatScript. So this is a snapshot of kind of the first part of the script that drives the chatter component of BadJupiter. So if I've decided that I can't figure out based on syntax what the skill is that you're trying to get me to accomplish, then I'm going to see if I can respond in a clever or halfway intelligent way. And ChatScript is pretty straightforward. It kind of takes keywords and allows you to create groups of keywords for flexibility. And then it defines these topics, and topics have rules for matching under them. And so the formula is pretty straightforward. It goes through your query and it scores every topic based on how well it matches the keywords in the topic against the query. And then you've got sort of a subset of all the topics which got some score above 0, and you start evaluating them from best score to worst score. And to evaluate them, you go through all the different matching rules. And if you don't find one in the first topic, you move on to the second topic. So chances are pretty good eventually, before you run out of things, you're going to get a response. And then the way that it responds is, for every match, there's a list of possible responses. And ChatScript is very clever about doing things like not repeating responses. It'll randomly pick one, but then if it finds that match again, it will have thrown that one out, so you don't hear the same thing twice, and all kinds of very clever stuff that I haven't quite messed with yet. But the model is pretty cool, and it's very extensible, and it's very human readable, which is helpful in a situation like this, where when we're dealing with the user's vocabulary that's all in the database, it becomes kind of sort of opaque, right? Sort of translucent. It's kind of hard to really see what's going on after a while. So great. So why does anyone wear Crocs? Is it going to rain today? How about the president of ours? We handle all that kind of stuff. The problem is, what if you say, how about a bar in Austin? Or what if you just say bar in Austin, right? So that's not syntactically correct or even English, but a good bot like BadJupiter should understand, especially if this is a user who asks a lot of questions about bars and spends a lot of time in Austin, that what they're trying to do is get a response, like they're trying to query, right? Even though they haven't kind of structured it well as a query. So these are implicit queries. And the problem that you have is you can't treat an implicit query as small talk, because you have the same problem, right? You're going to frustrate the user. How about a bar in Austin? If I say bar in Austin, you should tell me a bar in Austin, right? So what I end up doing there, and this is kind of the last step in this mess, but I think ends up being a pretty good solution, is to take the basic ChatScript model, but to be able to inform it as the user's vocabulary grows with terms that the user understands. So what I can do there then is have topics that match based on the user's worldview, right? Things that he talks about and places that he talks about and all that kind of stuff. And if I'm getting a really good match there, then I'm going to throw it back to the skill rather than come up with just a generic response and try to get him back on track. So the model ends up looking like this. And it took me 1.5 years to get here, and now I'm here, and I feel like it works pretty well, although it's not done because we're not in production. But there's a pre-parse process that happens, everywhere with everyone, where you get a query from a user and you do some things to make it easier to handle. You normalize characters, you explode contractions, you do all that kind of stuff. And then it does things like find and format phone numbers and URLs and special IDs and addresses, all those kinds of things that are things that we want to be able to make sense of, but they don't necessarily always conform to a standard format, right? Those are real things, and there's a lot of work to be done that can actually be gotten out of the way initially there. And then we tokenize it, and we're careful to do things like preserve multi-word tokens if they're in quotes and all that other kind of stuff. And then finally, where we have found special tokens like phone numbers and URLs and stuff like that, we can actually inform the intent tagger about those kind of things. So in addition to tagging the query with things like nouns and verbs and adjectives, we can tag phone numbers, we can tag addresses, we can tag URLs, and those will be interesting to some of the grammars that care about that kind of information. So that query is passed to the intent parser. The intent parser takes a look at it. If it can match it to one of the skills that BadJupiter knows, then it's handed to a skill parser. The skill parser is in charge of kind of taking that apart into the chunks that we have to care about working with to execute the skill. And then each skill handler kind of does a different thing, right? Requires certain types of information, may have to go back and have a dialogue with the user to get something. If you told me to tell Mike about the mean-eyed cat, but there's 10 different mean-eyed cats, I need to know where that is, so we need to have a dialogue, but I can do that. And the skill handler itself can handle that. Otherwise, we punt it to the small talk processor. And the whole goal here is to keep the user engaged and try to get him back on track. Remind him what we're here for. We're not here to talk about fashion. We're here to, you know, talk about margaritas and bars and things like that. So that's my adventure through figuring out how to do this kind of stuff. I think a lot of what I've done, when I go back and look, the state of the art is catching up, and the third-party tools and utilities are getting better and better. And now it's less a decision about whether, you know, one might have the capability to do what you want it to do than whether you want to trust your whole language processing front end to Microsoft or to Amazon or something like that, right? So trade-offs and things like that. But it's really exciting to me to kind of play with this stuff and see how other people do things. So that's my story, and I hope it's interesting. And I hope when I finish here in a second, somebody will tell me, hang on, there's so much easier way to do this. BadJupiter is right now sort of late alpha, kind of almost early beta. I've got a group of about 25 users that have been kicking it around for a couple months, and I'm really reluctant to sort of release it into the wild before I feel like I've kind of a little bit more fully baked the front end, because people get frustrated when things don't work, and the English language is a hard thing. So we're getting close. If anybody's interested in playing with it and kicking it around, follow me on Twitter, send me an email. I'm sam@badjupiter.com. Talk to me at the happy hour after this thing. If anybody's super good at these kinds of technologies and looking for a challenge, then come talk to me at the happy hour after this thing, because I don't find quite the amount of talent in Tulsa that I think you guys have here in Austin. And that's all I got. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, I can do that for the rest of my time. What language are you building? It's Python. It's Python. It's up on the Amazon cloud. It's moving slowly from a SQL database to a graph database, and it's moving slowly from a server-based architecture to a serverless Lambda thing. And that's got to do with scalability and performance and stuff like that. But I kind of, I feel like if I had to do this all over again, there's a lot of things I do differently, but starting with a server architecture and a SQL database on the back was the right thing to do, because it allowed me to really kind of, it's an easy way to, especially I was using Django, right? And I'm using Twilio for SMS, and then we've got, you know, the Facebook API. The thing doesn't care about the channel, right? So you can talk to it through Messenger or SMS or whatever. So I think a lot of those things were kind of, I think I thought about them the right way, and I think I knew that I was going to have to rebuild a lot of that to make it scalable. So that's kind of where we are now. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the parser that you're using for
The NLTK stuff. NLTK, it's that library. It's an academic library, and it's a Python thing. One of the reasons I picked Python was because there was such great support for language processing and tagging and all that kind of stuff. So it seems to work pretty well. It's also extensible. You're able to kind of you're able to extend it and change it when you need to, which you do sometimes. Anybody else? Yeah. So the thing, yeah. So one of the things that I think is pretty neat about this, but also is pretty challenging about this, is that you know, I mean, without kind of giving you a long-winded answer, like the idea that like I don't come to Austin a lot, but I come every once in a while, and when I come, I'll invariably kind of find something I like or a place I like or something. Don't want to be sure I don't forget, but it might not be 6 months or 9 months or 12 months before I come back, right? And I will have forgotten it if I just wrote it down on a piece of paper or sent myself an email. So what I want to do is the same thing I would do if I, you know, had a great executive assistant. I would say, hey, don't ever forget about the Mean-Eyed Cats. Johnny Cash Bar, they've got, you know, cool beers on tap, great place to hang out, little patio outside. I'm never going to remember this when I come back in a year, right? And what she would do is she would remember, or he, outdoor patio, beers on tap, Johnny Cash, right? Like all the keywords, like should keyword that. But this is my vocab. These are the kinds of things I say. And I'll start to say things more and more. There'll be things I talk about a lot. Like my wife is interested in playgrounds and daycare places and clothes store for kids. I'm interested in bars and restaurants and places to go run and swim, right? It's totally different. So the vocabulary of keywords and descriptors and phrases and even places that I talk about is completely different from somebody else's. And BadJupiter kind of, you know, has to keep those siloed, right? But it also understands relationships between people when it's sharing information. So it'll start to try to infer common interests. And when it does that, then it can maybe, if I don't know a margarita place, but you do, and I know you, and we've talked about restaurants before, you know, your recommendation is the best recommendation. So that's what I meant by vocabulary. It's,
Well, let's give it up for Sam.
is that it? All right, thanks.